Hello everyone, this video has been sponsored by Hunter Killer. For many of us in the Northern Hemisphere, our days are getting shorter, weather's getting colder, and things are starting to feel a little bit gloomy. So this is a perfect setting to solve a mystery. Allow me to introduce you to Hunter Killer, a fully immersive monthly subscription box service where you get to play the role of detective. You can sift through all manner of evidence, from audio recordings, documents, police files, digital media, and much, much more. And the level of detail within everything you use makes Hunter Killer a truly captivating experience. For me, it's been so much fun, as I now get to solve a mystery instead of just writing about them. And having the plot thicken every month with fresh evidence really keeps you on your toes. Myself and my family have really liked the new Blair Witch Project box and are eager for more. I'm really confident that all of you will enjoy playing this, so why not sign up using the link in the description and get 20% off your first box using discount code BRIEFCASE. Do you have what it takes to hunt a killer? Today we are looking at a case from the first part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to France. Marie Fortuné Capel was born in Paris on the 15th of January 1816. Her mother had come from an aristocratic family, and it was believed that her grandmother was born following a liaison between Marie's great-grandmother and Louis-Philippe II, who ruled France between 1785 and 1793. Despite this, Marie's family were not rich, and her father served as an artillery officer in Napoleon's army. When Marie was 12 years old, her father died in a hunting accident. Her mother was now left a widow, with no real means of supporting herself or her children. She was, however, a very attractive lady from noble lineage, so soon married for the second time. Tragedy would strike Marie again, as when she was 18 years old, her mother died. Marie was then taken in by her mother's sister, whose husband held the prestigious position of Secretary General of the Bank of France. Marie was now living in a very elegant part of Paris and mixing in the highest social circles. She was sent to one of the most expensive educational institutions, where she studied with the daughters of some of the wealthiest men in the country. She did her best to try and convince the other students that she too was from a wealthy aristocratic family, but many knew of her unfortunate situation. Over the next few years, her friends started to get married, and it always seemed to Marie that they married into rich and noble families. At the age of 23, however, she was still unmarried. Marie had a marriage dowry of 90,000 francs. While this was not enough to secure a marriage into one of the elite Parisian families, it was a considerable sum. She was still the responsibility of her aunt, who was becoming anxious that her niece should marry, so it was decided that one of Marie's uncles should be given the responsibility of finding her a suitable match. He employed the services of a marriage broker, and after a short time, Marie was presented to a gentleman named Charles Lafarge. Although she was not attracted to him, he was reportedly a wealthy ironmaster who had substantial property and income. He lived about 550 kilometers south of Paris, in a small village not far from the town of Toul, in the Limousin region of France. Marie was not particularly impressed with the match that her uncle had chosen, but she was an intelligent young lady and was aware that she had little choice but to accept the proposal. Soon after, Charles Lafarge and Marie Fortuné Capel were married. Charles was 28 years old. His house was in the small village of Glandiere and had once been a monastery. He lived there with his mother and sister. When Marie arrived in the summer of 1839, the house looked very grand, but as her carriage drew closer, she realised that it was in fact in a state of disrepair. Her new husband's mother and sister also did not seem very pleased with the prospect of her living there as lady of the house. Part of the estate was used as an iron foundry. However, Far from being the wealthy businessman who Marie thought she had married, Charles's business was deep in debt, and her 90,000 francs dowry was going to be used to appease his creditors. The interior of the house was also very run down, and as there was such little money to keep such a large dwelling, the rooms had not been decorated for some years. Marie was not only a long way from her family and friends, she now found herself married to a man who she had been reliably informed had a very successful business, but he had turned out to be someone of very little financial means. It was now August the 13th, 1839, and Marie felt extremely disappointed with her situation. Even though she knew that her circumstances would prevent her from securing a marriage into one of the elite Parisian families, she had hoped to marry a kind and caring gentleman who would have been able to provide a comfortable lifestyle for her. After being shown the house, she immediately went to her room, locked the door, and wept. She then wrote an emotional letter asking Charles to release her from the marriage. She even wrote that if he failed to do this, she would take her own life by swallowing arsenic. Charles was not an unreasonable man and seemed to have some sympathy for his wife's predicament. He told her that he would not release her from the marriage, but would not insist that they share the same bed until he had proved that he could make his business a success. He also promised to invest some of her dowry into restoring the house. Marie accepted her husband's proposal, and while Charles concentrated on the business, Marie happily spent her days trying to restore the run-down interior of the property into something more refined. From the outside, it seemed that Charles and Marie were a happy aristocratic couple. Marie wrote letters informing her friends and family that life for her was idyllic, and as the weeks passed, Charles and Marie developed a very good relationship. In December 1839, Charles undertook a trip to Paris in an attempt to raise money for his business. He was accompanied by one of his employees, who had worked for the family for many years. Marie thought this gentleman to be a devious character, but Charles disagreed with his wife and thought him to be a trusting employee. The pair stayed in Paris for more than a month, during which time Marie regularly wrote to her husband. She excitedly informed him about the progress of the improvements that were being made to the house. She would also send him little gifts. On one occasion, she sent him a box of small cakes, accompanied by a letter. When the box arrived, however, it was received by his employee, who later passed it on to his master. When Charles opened the box, he was a little confused, as the box did not contain a collection of little cakes, as described in his wife's letter, but instead it contained just one larger cake. Nevertheless, he ate it. He stayed in Paris for a while longer, but he started to experience terrible abdominal pains. They became so bad that he returned to Glandiere, and on his arrival, he took to his bed. Marie then took it upon herself to try and nurse her husband back to health. A doctor was summoned, and after examining the patient, diagnosed that Charles was suffering from cholera. Only 8 years earlier, Paris had endured a very serious cholera outbreak, and his symptoms were very similar to those unfortunate Parisians who had caught the disease in 1832. The doctor prescribed medicine and instructed Marie on how best to look after her husband. But despite the hours Marie spent at his bedside, Charles Lafarge didn't improve. As his condition worsened, Marie asked another physician to call. He, however, gave the same diagnosis and told Marie that she needed to give him regular doses of eggnog. Charles's mother started to think that something suspicious was going on. Her son's condition did not seem to be improving, and when a family friend who was staying with them, named Anna Brunn, saw Marie mixing a white powder into the eggnog, she reported it to Madame Lafarge. Madame Lafarge had never liked Marie, so she decided to take the remains of the cup of eggnog to be analysed. It was later confirmed that the cup contained traces of arsenic. Marie was immediately forbidden from giving any food or drink to her husband, but shortly afterwards, on Tuesday, January the 14th, 1840, Charles Lafarge died. Madame Lafarge was beside herself with grief and demanded an investigation into the sudden death of her son. She contacted the magistrate, and the following day, the authorities arrived to speak to Marie and the other ladies who were staying in the house. They were given what remained of the contents of the drinks that Marie had prepared for her husband, as Anna Brunn had kept them safe by placing the items in a cupboard. The gardener told the magistrate that as there were so many mice and rats in the house, Marie had given him arsenic and asked him to make a paste and place it in the area where the rats had been seen. When the dates were checked with the chemist, it was confirmed that the arsenic was purchased shortly before Marie sent her husband the cakes, and then again the day before he returned from Paris. A post-mortem was performed, and the pathologist found traces of arsenic in the deceased man's stomach. Marie Lafarge was arrested and charged with the murder of her husband. She was taken to the local jail, but throughout her ordeal, she protested her innocence. Fortunately, Marie's very wealthy aunt employed two of the most respected lawyers in Paris to defend her. However, shortly before the trial was due to begin, the public prosecutor received a letter from the Marquise de Lyoto, who claimed that following a visit from Marie before she married Charles Lafarge, some diamonds had disappeared from her room. She had never believed that Marie could have taken them, but after now learning about her true character, she would be obliged if the correct authorities would search her house to see if they were there. After a brief search of Marie's room, the missing diamonds were recovered. Marie tried to explain how the jewels had come to be there by saying that the Marquise was being blackmailed by a former lover, and she had been given the task of giving him the diamonds in order that he did not reveal secrets about the distinguished lady. She was tried for theft in July 1840 and found guilty, for which she received a 2-year prison sentence. The story of the jewel theft very quickly spread through French society and was reported in all the papers. Marie Lafarge started to become somewhat of a celebrity. Her story intrigued the French people. The poor girl, who tragically lost her father and mother and was sent to live with a rich aunt, she became a young woman without favourable marriage prospects and was only able to secure a match with a gentleman of little financial means. She also had to live with her husband's mother, who had always made her feel unwelcome. As Marie awaited her trial for the murder of her husband, she received thousands of letters, some from wealthy gentlemen offering marriage. Newspapers started to write about her every day. They knew that any story about Marie Lafarge would arouse the public's interest, as she was the favoured topic of conversation in the shops, bars and cafes all over the country. And the French people seemed split into those who considered her guilty and those who believed her innocent. Her trial for the murder of her husband began on the 3rd of September 1840 and took place in the town of Toul. She was dressed in black and approached the court with a solemn look. She projected an image of a young lady who had witnessed much tragedy in her life and was now being so unjustly accused. The courtroom was packed and people gathered outside just to try and get a glimpse of the now infamous Marie Lafarge. The prosecution had a strong case, and following the death of Charles, an autopsy had found arsenic in his stomach and also in the remains of the food and drink that he had eaten. But defence lawyers challenged these findings, telling the court that the methods used were primitive and could not be considered accurate. They demanded that the test be conducted again, using the relatively new Marsh test. This was a highly sensitive method in the detection of arsenic in the body and had been developed in 1836 by a British chemist named James Marsh. The judge ordered that the body of Charles Lafarge be exhumed and more tests to be performed. When the results were presented to the courts, they showed that there was no evidence of arsenic. The packed courtroom gasped, and the papers hurriedly wrote of the sensational new turn in the case. The prosecution, however, requested that the remains of the food that he had eaten also be examined, the results of which showed high levels of arsenic, the eggnog in particular, which had extremely high levels of the poison. As the results seemed to contradict each other, It was agreed to seek the opinion of one of Europe's leading authorities of forensic medicine and toxicology, a gentleman named Professor Mathieu Orfila. The professor then conducted the Marsh test by using samples taken from the deceased man's body and from the earth around the grave. When he came into court to inform the judge and the excited press and public of his findings, the courtroom was silent. The professor carefully explained how he had conducted the test and what the results of it were. He said that the body did indeed have traces of arsenic present, and this could not be due to anything other than ingesting the substance. The courtroom was stunned. The defence's only option now was to try and refute these findings. So they called another expert witness. They summoned a well-known French chemist named Francois Vincent Raspail. However, he was delayed in his arrival to court, so after 17 days, the judge ended the proceedings and summed up the case. When the court reconvened, the verdict was read out, and Maria Lafarge was found guilty of the murder of her husband and sentenced to death by the guillotine. She was then taken to the prison in Montpellier, where her defence team appealed the verdict. The public was still fascinated by the case, and many disagreed with her sentence. Eventually it was commuted to life in prison. She spent much of her time there writing her memoirs. After 12 years she was pardoned by Napoleon III and released in June 1852. She was then taken by an uncle to live in Ussat, very close to the border with Spain. However, 12 years in prison had taken their toll on Marie, and on the 7th of November 1852, just 5 months after being released, she died from tuberculosis. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I will see you in the next brief case.